I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month.
Please.
Sorry. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
David, no.
Look, you can say yes in a taxi. I have a 2:30 appointment
I'm
and you're...
staying right here.
Oh, afraid you'll say yes?
I'll see you tonight at Brandon's party.
Okay. You can say yes there just as well as in a taxi. Goodbye, darling.
Bye.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you will ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley had very little impact on my life, but was mildly inconvenient for 8 others. Janet Walker, who was using him to make an ex jealous. Henry Kentley, the boy's father, and only decent person in the movie. He's Mad Aunt, so-and-so. His best friend, who looks very handsome here. A housekeeper called Mrs. Doyle, I mean Wilson. And the real villain, who indoctrinated young men into his weird ideals. Rupert Caudell, so named because he says he was only cotton. And the 2 who were responsible for everything. Bert Brandon and Ernie Phillip. Well, now that we've set the scene for today's old-timey movie, let's give some context. Rope is a 1948 film from the master of suspense, old Alfred Hitchcock. Not happy enough with this being his first film in beautiful Technicolor, Alfie decides to add an extra gimmick of trying to film the entire movie in one singular shot. Does he succeed? No, not even close. This is 1948, and unfortunately, doing something like this is not so easy, but by God, he gives it a fair whack. The cameras at the time were bigger than buildings. No, that's a lie, I made that up. But the cameras were very big and could only film, I believe, up to 10 minutes of footage. An added problem was the projection process in the cinema itself, which required reels to be changed, so cuts were, unfortunately, unavoidable. Given the crazy limitations he had to work with, I think old Alfie Hitchcock did one hell of a job. People do complain about the focus into the backs of people for the changes, but come on, even Birdman did tricks like that, especially with their corridor walls, and this is a much more enjoyable movie than that film, and artistic vision, I have always said, is the coward's way out. One aspect of Rope that I feel goes a little bit under-discussed is the set, which, I hate to say, is a character in itself. Boo me! It is really beautifully put together with this amazing miniature backdrop. I would love someday to see some background images or footage of this city skyline to see just how exactly they did it. At first I thought it was just a matte painting, but you see the lights come on and twinkle as the skies become darker and darker. You could almost see this as a precursor to the much more famous Hitch movie, Rear Window. And if anyone has any insight into how they put this all together, please let me know down in the comments. There is a lot to talk about with this movie, so let's begin with its inspiration. The movie is based on the 1929 play of the same name by Patrick Hamilton. That play itself is based on the Leopold and Loeb murder case of 1924, one of the most infamous criminal trials of its day. Nathan Leopold Jr. and Richard Loeb, both wealthy and highly intelligent teenagers from Chicago, conspired to commit what they believed would be the perfect crime. Their victim was 14-year-old Bobby Franks, a distant cousin of Loeb. On May 21st, 1924, Leopold and Loeb lured Frank into a rented car, bludgeoned him to death, and then dumped his body in a remote area. Their motive was not financial gain, but rather to demonstrate their intellectual superiority and to experience the thrill of committing the perfect murder. They believed they could carry out the crime without getting caught because of their intelligence and meticulous planning. The play based on this horrible crime moves the setting to England, a rather dandy place. When it was being adapted back for an American film, the writer joked about the English dialogue becoming unintentionally homosexual.
Some of the dialogue from the original play and put it back in this, and it was full of "my dear boy." Well, every "my dear boy" was marked in big blue pencil. Homosexual, out, out, out. So it had to be cleaned up from all those English remarks, which had nothing to do with anything, really.
Well, dear boys, maybe this was unintentional, but let's address the big gay elephant in the room. The main characters are a couple. They never say it.
You could never say that they were it. So there was no mention of it in the picture at all.
But come on, they are clearly a couple. They are Fraser and Niles if the writers had the guts to make them lovers instead of brothers. They share a flat that, as far as I can tell, only has one bedroom. They only mention one anyways. Brandon is the more domineering one, controlling Philip, even planning to take him away to the country for a couple of weeks to practice piano, and then later suggesting they go on a holiday together after all this sordid murder and superiority is finished. Now that is couple goals. The opening shot of them panting and breathing excitedly is maybe as sexual as anything else in a Hitchcock movie. All it needs is for one of them to start smoking a cigarette. Oh, well, I spoke too soon. There you go. What I like about this subtext is that it's not made any deal of whatsoever. They just happen to be gay, even though, again, yes, they don't say it, but they clearly are. They are just good friends. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. What is really impressive is they aren't gay parodies. They are not over-the-top camp like you find in every gay character from a 90s sitcom. Both have masculine and feminine traits, and being gay isn't really part of the story. It's just an added wrinkle to their characters, which is really refreshing.
What is extraordinary about it is its treatment of homosexuality. I mean, today it still is one of the most sophisticated movies ever made on that subject. Probably treats them more as people than anybody else has. Hitchcock certainly knew that, and it certainly attracted him. And what he liked was not that they were homosexual, but they were homosexual murderers. If they were just murderers, he wouldn't have been interested. If they were just homosexual, he wouldn't be interested. You had to have another little twist to it.
Stuart Granger, in particular, encapsulates this, as he is maybe, to me anyways, the most interesting character in the movie. He seems to be the more feminine of the two, and Brendan dominates him, but he is clearly the stronger. Whether he is strangling chickens or old college friends, to opening difficult champagne bottles, he is the brute of the two. He also acts like such a petulant child throughout the movie, which is really fun. Off topic, Farley Granger, the actor, aged like a fine fucking wine. My goodness. Our other lead, Brandon, is just, well, he's just the worst, but in the best way possible. He is that friend who tells you, can I say something mean? And commit murder? And you just love it because he's such a little rascal. While Philip immediately falls apart and regrets everything, Brandon is smug, satisfied, and wants people to know just how clever he is. He is so delightfully arrogant the whole movie and sees himself as so superior and smarter than everybody else. He also has the absolute best fashion. Look at that top of the range suit. That man knows how to style, and my goodness, he wears it as good as Stuart Granger aged. Well, I think we've had enough pre-ramble, so spoiler warning. I'm about to run through and spill the beans on the whole movie, so I recommend watching it first if you haven't already. So, let's let the fun begin.
Are we ready?
As ready as we'll ever be.
The film starts with this shot of the street before we hear a scream and cut. This one-shot movie already has a cut, but it's the title, so we'll let it go. There's at least 3 or 4 more hard cuts like this in the rest of the movie, but luckily they're edited so well that you don't really notice them, only on repeated watches or you're specifically looking out to see them. Inside, we see that our daring duo have murdered their dullest friend. The writer actually complains about the scene, feeling it takes away from the suspense.
I thought the suspense would be, is there or is there not a body in that chest? Well, here he eliminated that. Once you see it, you know they're murderers, and you know they're going to get caught. And I think it took a lot of the tension out of the picture.
I actually agree, and I think the scream is fine, but it should have cut to them just closing the chest. It doesn't take away from the film though, it just could have been an interesting idea to play with. Our heroes are breathing heavy after their perfect, sexy murder. Philip asking Brandon not to open the curtains. Not yet. Here we see how the two will be throughout the movie. Brandon is so nonchalant while Philip is almost immediately a mess. Brandon calms them both down, and in a crazy scene they have some champagne to celebrate and talk about just what they felt during the murder.
How did you feel?
Here we learn their motive. They did it to feel superior. He could have just been mean to a waiter, but even that's too evil for these guys. I mean, they're murderers, not Karens. Even more macabre, and arrogantly, they invite over all these friends and family for a party. These lads. Honestly, off topic for just a moment, if you would allow me to digress, it's crazy to me that Frasier didn't do an episode based on this. This demands farce and shenanigans. Instead of a murder, it could have been some gaudy decoration, a painting, a fur coat, their dad's chair. Hell, it could have been Eddie. What could have been? Anyways, Brandon suddenly has some divine inspiration. He decides to serve dinner from the chest. Philip thinks he's going too far, but comes round when he realizes it will stop people from opening it. Philip has a bit of a fit though, as he sets up when he notices the rope.
Brandon!
Brendan tells him to pull himself together. What if Mrs. Wilson came in and he reacted that way? Speaking of which, poor Mrs. Wilson returns and is devastated. Absolutely distraught at them ruining her lovely table.
Well, I think it looks downright peculiar.
Philip again is worried. He's always worried. That Philip needs to just relax a little bit, but he's still worried about the rope. But Brandon, ever confident, swings it nonchalantly around before returning it to the drawer in this great shot. Brandon hornily, I might say, informs poor Mrs. Wilson that the real villain, Rupert the Codder Cadell, will be coming to the party, which really perks her up. Unfortunately, Philip again, the big worrywart he is not so thrilled about the idea, as he worries Cadell will catch them out. But Brandon is thrilled about the allure of danger to make their party even more exciting, because having a murder victim hidden in a box while his family eat dinner just wasn't enough excitement apparently. Speaking of Cadell, he is played by Jimmy Stewart, something the writer was against as he felt Stewart was too much of a Boy Scout and audience wouldn't get the underlined idea that he may have been in a sordid relationship with our two good boys. He's not sexy enough is what the writer thought. I think this is an interesting point by the writer, but I love Stewart and I wouldn't replace him. He's really excellent here and it's fun watching him try to unravel something he doesn't realize he is unraveling. Our first guest arrives and it's Kenneth, the handsome best friend of David and his kinda fiance's previous boyfriend. David is the closest thing we get in this movie to a Hitchcock blonde. As you can imagine, Kenny is nervous to see his former living friend David and his ex-girlfriend Janice. But Brandon, ever the rascal, tells him he might have a better chance with Janice than he thinks. Speaking of Janice, here she comes ready for a gay old time.
Hello, Docs.
Janice tries hard to be funny and almost succeeds on occasion, but more often than not,
I lay the bomb of all time.
the fun is ruined when she sees Kenny Boy and she unsubtly takes Brandon not very far away to berate him. Women, am I right? They just can't take a really cruel joke. Jan is a fun character. She has a really odd way of talking as she tries to come across as a delightful and charismatic person. She reminds me of the wife from The Truman Show who is always talking to the audience like she is in a commercial. I guess Jan's try-hard manner does match her career of a lifestyle columnist. She seems the most natural when she is angry at Brandon. She also gets a lot of sexist and insulting comments thrown at her for literally no reason.
If I were you, I'd go easy on the patty, dear.
Come on, Kenneth,
Calories.
don't be polite. Philip...
Even Kenny basically admits later on he dumped her because he didn't think she was very bright, now realizing that it was in fact he who lacked the brightness.
I'm not very smart.
Why?
I never realized you were...
At least she has David. Had David. Poor Jan. The only character treated worse is poor Mrs. Wilson, who's always ignored. Anyways, here's an example as we meet our next guests. David's lovely father, Mr. Henry Kentley, and his mad as a badger sister, Mrs. Atwater. Henry is a very polite man, and your sympathy grows for him as you see just how kind he is. His sister is just a bit of a laugh and here to be the butt of some jokes.
You know, when I was a girl, I used to read quite a bit.
Oh, we all do strange things in our childhood.
But she is fun too and fills in for Mrs. Kenley, who is homesick tonight. Mrs. Atwater confuses Ken for David, causing Philip to break a glass in panic and cut his hands. Keep an eye on this hand, by the way. They keep forgetting he cut it, and in a lot of shots there is no mark. Sloppy, Hitch. Sloppy. We also get Atwater doing some star reading describing a future marriage. Luckily, she's also describing Ken, so it has a chance of coming true. Brandon in fact works on that as he pours Jan a glass and asks Ken to deliver. Say what you want about Brandon, but he's a hell of a wingman, killing your rival and setting up a party for you to reconnect. Also, he happens to be an ex-boyfriend of Jan as well. Now that's a pal if ever there was one. As Mrs. Atwater tells Philip his hands will bring him great fame, the monstrous Rupert Cadell, our final guest, arrives to the party. He immediately makes his presence felt as he insults everybody.
May I present Mr. Rupert Cadell?
Delighted.
Thank you.
You must have taught my son, David.
Well, you flatter me.
It's awfully good to see you again.
Why?
Did he do me justice?
Do you deserve justice? You always did stutter when you were excited.
I got that special patty you like.
I don't like it anymore.
What did you see her in?
I don't quite recall the something. Or was it just plain something? Really, something rather like that.
I don't believe you ever wed.
So, the players are all in place, so let's see where we are so far. Brandon and Philip are just really good mates and nothing else who live in a luxurious penthouse apartment with just one bedroom. Allegedly. To prove they're not gay, to prove their superiority, they decide to kill their dullest mate and only child, David, in the perfect murder. Ever the multitasker, Brendan throws a party right after, inviting David's best friend, who had previously dumped David's current fiancée Janice, who, by the way, is also invited. Needing some more numbers, he also invited along David's father under the pretense of showing him some books, because of course, when I want to show someone my books, I have to murder one of their family members first and hide them in the room. That's just good etiquette. Henry's daft stepsister also tags along to give ironic star readings. Being a dull crew though, Brandon decides he needs to spice things up with our final guest, Rupert the Codder Cadell, the man who put the idea of superiority into our heroes' heads. He is the only man who could possibly thwart our boys' insane plan, but at least he cheers up horny Mrs. Wilson, who only stops complaining about how the boys ruined her nice dinner table to objectify Mr. Cadell. Not that he minds.
Wonderful Mrs. Wilson. I may marry her.
The party continues at a breakneck pace. The runtime is only 120 minutes, so this party must be only 40 minutes long. But it feels like it is longer, thanks to excellent pacing and camera work. Brandon infuriatingly drops hints and adds extra little touches here and there as Philip is barely holding it all together. Things boil up as Brandon tells a story about Philip strangling chickens, causing him to erupt and call Brandon a dirty lying liar face. We get a perfectly timed physical cut to Rupert, whose eyes just suddenly light up.
Wow. Is it all over?
I'm afraid so, Rupert.
Oh, what a pity. In another moment you might have been strangling each other instead of a chicken.
He suspects something now, only problem is he doesn't know what he suspects. The argument leads into Rupert discussing his theory that murder should be allowed for those few of superior intellect. He tells the guests of his approval of murder and the problem that it could solve. The same kind of talk that twisted our incorrigible young heroes into the murderers they became. He also seems to pitch the idea for the Purge.
Now mind you, I don't hold with the extremists who feel that there should be open season for murder all year round. No, personally I would prefer to have Cut a Throat Week or Strangulation Day.
This ghastly conversation upsets Mr. Kentley, who is actually decent and kind. It leads to him having an argument with that rotten Brandon and frankly killing the party's mood. Brendan eventually apologizes, going too far, and they ask Henry if he would like to see the books now. Henry, the kind, generous soul he is, accepts, but also asks to call his wife first to check if she's heard anything from little David. The movie now transitions into a detective story as Cadell, stimulated from all the drama, asks Brandon a question. He questions Brandon and Philip at different times and particularly puts the squeeze on Philip. All this scene needs is a lamp to shine on Philip's face. Philip forgets his manners a couple times though, as he doesn't appreciate Rupert's questioning, getting angry on occasion.
Temper.
Rupert brings back up the chicken story to prove he knows Philip is a no good, dirty, lying liar face too. The tense scene ends with Philip commenting on the clumsy way Brandon tied the books together, giving a clue to the dastardly Rupert. By this stage, both are beginning to unravel and are fully turning on each other as Philip gets drunk and Brandon shows his first signs of the pressure finally getting to him. We next get maybe the best scene of the whole movie as all the important characters discuss the whereabouts of David a little off screen as we focus in on the help Mrs. Wilson beginning to tidy up around the chest. The suspense builds and just as you think she's about to open and find the body, Brandon steps in to stop her at the last second. He informs her she will need to come by tomorrow to clean up and tells her to just leave the books for now. At this stage, everyone's had enough of this peculiar party and all decide to leave because they're worried for David and want to look for him. Janice even invites Kenneth, who she has made up with, to join them as they look for David. This prompts a very smug Brandon to say,
What did I predict?
"Oh, that Brandon." Oh, side note, look there. That's Hitchcock. That's the cameo. Got him. In two other brilliant masterstrokes, Brandon makes sure Mr. Kentley doesn't forget the books, tied up with the murder weapon, and Rupert, the big silly goose, puts on the wrong hat. What a big idiot. But fortuitously, he looks on the inside, seeing the initials DK. A startled Rupert, who seems a little shell-shocked, leaves with the rest. Something I never noticed before until putting this video together, you can actually hear Rupert from the hall offer to help Mr. Kentley with the books.
Can I help you with those books, Mr. Kentley? Thanks.
This movie script is just so damned tight, I love it. Brandon celebrates the amazing success of his party, but Philip is not such a happy camper with all of Brandon's neat little touches. They have a bit of a tiff, so to try and calm him down, Brendan tells him they should go on holiday after it's all over. After all, they deserve it. Murder is not easy work. Philip admits he's scared to death before being interrupted by a leaving Mrs. Wilson. They prepare to finish their plan to remove the body, but they receive a call from an unexpected visitor. Brendan, who frankly is the reason they're going to be caught, makes his biggest mistake by telling Philip, the drunken mess, to answer the phone, and of course Philip immediately freaks out when it's Rupert asking to come back up. Brendan has to take over the conversation and welcomes him up, but as they wait for him to come, Brendan grabs his gun and we get ready for the final game of cat and mouse. But which one's the cat and which one's the mouse?
No one is going to get in my way now.
The tension is full as Brandon plays it cool, Philip goes full child, and Rupert plays dumb, pretending to have lost his cigarette case and doesn't get the hint to leave until he finishes his long drink. We get some back and forth with Brandon daring his former master to guess what they did. As the scene plays out, Rupert guesses most of the scheme but seems to dismiss the idea of them having actually done away with David before pointing out,
But I never would have mentioned it if it weren't that you seem to be carrying fear of discovery in your pocket.
What?
That's a gun, isn't it?
Brandon laughs this off, saying it was for protection in the countryside. You know what country folk are like? Scum. That's what they're like. Scum. Here we go. We get to the big climax as Rupert pulls out the rope. Philip freaks the fuck out. Rupert manages to wrestle the gun away from him, not before burning his hand on a misfire. Rupert then does what he was too afraid to do. He goes to open the case.
Go ahead and look. I hope you like what you see.
Rupert, of course, is not happy with what he finds, as he realizes it was him who put the idea for this in their heads. Brendan pleads with Rupert. He pleads for him to understand what they did and why, but Rupert says, "Hey, I was only codding. I never said did this. I was just codding. I'm a codder. Don't put this on me." He gives a great speech conveniently denouncing his beliefs, but also saying that it's not what he meant.
And you've tried to twist them into a cold, logical excuse for your ugly murder. Oh, they never were that, Brandon. And you can't make them that.
I'm pretty sure it's what you meant. The massive hypocrite Rupert then scolds Brandon. He then fires the gun out the window, alerting people and police. The film ends with Philip playing the piano as we hear the police sirens getting closer and closer. Why is this movie not talked about more? My goodness, I mean, people do like it. They do like this movie, but I often see it dismissed as a gimmick. To me, it's a combination of Rear Window and Dial M for Murder, and frankly, it's more entertaining and intriguing than both of them. And that's not to dismiss those two movies. I love them, but this for me is just that little bit better. There's so many other little details I didn't even touch upon, such as the mistletoe bough story, which was apparently a favourite of Brandon's in school. Mr. Kentley even tells the tale to the other guests in which the bride-to-be, playing hide and seek, locks herself in a chest in the attic and is unable to escape. She is found years later as a skeleton in a wedding dress. The story clearly an inspiration to the boys for their own murder plan. Also, one of the underrated aspects is actually pretty close to a perfect murder. What gives them away in the end isn't Philip, who's freaking out the entire time. If he didn't try to set up Janice and Kenneth insinuating something, if he didn't use the rope to tie the books together, it's all of Brandon's neat little touches, coming back to shoot himself in the foot. So, there we are. We learned about the production, we gave away the plot, and gushed about just how darn good and underrated Rope really is. Every time I rewatch this, I see and notice something new and grow to appreciate each performance more and more. Hopefully you will have been inspired to go back and give this film a watch, as well as some other classics. I'm not so sure when and what the next old-timey movie will be, but be sure to know it will involve a lot of talking, a lot of drinking, and of course, a lot of murder. Boy, I sure did say a thing or two about a thing or two. Who knows what I might say next? Could be something good. Only one way to find out, and that's by liking and subscribing. Go on, you know you want to.